This week, we are very excited to welcome Bryan Patton from Quest Software. Bryan is going to come on and talk about Active Directory security and insecurity in enterprise adoption of Active Directory and how they can actually secure it. In the news, 9 security horror stories that will forever haunt your nightmares. A little late for Halloween, I know, but I had to throw that one in there. Automation from Twistlock. Safe Breach is in the news as well, presenting on various topics at some upcoming conferences. Ixia has a product announcement. Some certificate stuff happening. Actually, Symantec getting rid of one of their SSL cert companies to DigiCert, which is interesting. And so much more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. This week, and talk about them as it relates to enterprise security. You're going to do great. we're gonna
I think that people think that you and I talk like every day at night. You know, It's like, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of a bit of an exhausting week. And I think that we noticed that a little bit in the stories for this week as well.
LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. This is episode 67 for November 1st, 2017. Very excited to be here on one of our refreshed kind of sets, as I'll call it. Normally, this set is reserved for Secure Digital Life. You can check them out at securedigitalife.com. We're doing some set redesign, so you may get a different take on things throughout this week and next. Very quickly, John will join us shortly. I've just got some quick announcements before we get into our feature interview for today. Go to itpro.tv/enterprise security. Use the discount code ES30. Try it free for 7 days. You can get training. Your employer can subscribe for training for your entire IT department and manage and monitor your training, all for your benefit, so that you can have more time in your schedule to get training. You don't have to leave the comfort of your office. You can skip to certain sections of select training. You can get full transcripts. It's really awesome. All your training that is done online should be with IT Pro TV. They're just awesome. Awesome folks, awesome content, and awesome programs for you to subscribe to so you can learn stuff, essentially. The other announcement is the Signal Sciences webcast. Very excited about this webcast. Joff Thayer and myself and Zane Lackey will be talking about defending modern web applications. And one of the things that I've started, which will likely turn into a full talk, I'm not sure yet, but as many of you know, we have internal software that we wrote ourselves for Security Weekly. We've got a couple of different things, one of which is our production software that does all of the posting. I'll share some of my journey in deploying a modern web application and some of the things that I've learned, and talk about how it's changed from the times of deploying hardware physically inside of a data center into deploying applications using something like Docker today, and then talk about some of the security challenges. And then Zane will talk about some of the ways that they're solving some of those security challenges over at Signal Sciences. It's going to be an awesome webcast. I'm super excited. Check them out, securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. You can register today. That is happening tomorrow. All righty. I am now joined by Bryan Patton, a principal strategic systems consultant for Quest Software. based out of Texas. He's worked for Quest for 16 years. Prior to that, he worked for INS, performing migrations to Active Directory and Exchange from several source platforms. Prior to that, he was serving in the United States Marine Corps. We thank you for your service, and we welcome you to the show today. Bryan, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Bryan, tell me a little bit about your history in information security before we get started. What are some of the things that you've done other than me just reading your bio?
Back in the late 90s, I started off doing mainframe administration back in Okinawa, Japan, when I was part of the Marine Corps. Later on, I transitioned to another unit doing Banyan Binds administration.
Nice.
Back when it was Windows 3.51, kind of transitioning to NT4.0. Then I changed units once again, and that's when the Marine Corps had actually just finished the migration from Banyan Binds to NT4.0 and Exchange 5.5. And then that led to the civilian sector doing migrations, and then that led me to Quest about 16 years ago when I was using my migration skills and helping people set up their Active Directory going forward.
So your career has largely been focused on Active Directory?
And very much so, definitely.
Wow.
Yeah, a little bit of Banyan Vines. I mean, we acquired a company, 10 plus years ago that, brought your Unix, Linux into Active Directory.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have to expand my skill set for a little bit, and I can speak some of the language you do around sudo and some of that, but not nearly as deep as you probably.
Wow, that's I don't envy you. I went a totally different path in my career and jumped in the Linux camp. So I guess my first question for you, Bryan, is what are, in your opinion, and you work with organizations in a different light. I see John Strand has just joined us. John and I, welcome, John. John and I primarily have looked at Windows from a very offensive standpoint. And that term is overloaded there, right? But you've worked in trying to get it work and integrating it. And so from your perspective, Bryan, what security problems are most common and which ones are most challenging in your experience with Active Directory?
I think it's the similar challenges you're probably facing across the board, and it's really who has access to what. Active Directory first came out late 90s, early 2000, and people set the initial delegation model. So people unknowingly created backdoors for themselves back then. Let's say, for instance, I delegated out full permissions on an OU. Well, I said it, I forgot about it. Does that person still need the rights? People's jobs change all the time, but there's this backdoor glaring out there right now where this guy has full OU admin rights where he may not even be in IT anymore. So if you ever compromise any of those different accounts, you have rights. And it's not the traditional rights that most people think about, like domain admins, enterprise admins, things of that nature. Here's a delegated right. It's not a member of a group, but he has permissions to do stuff.
No, that's really interesting. What, in your opinion, has led to, and so I guess we all have to agree that Active Directory is probably the most attacked piece of technology in an organization. It suffers from several inherent flaws in the architecture of Active Directory that lead to essentially bad actors being able to do bad things. Do you agree with that assessment, Bryan, as we stand here today? Is it being one of the top problems that organizations have to deal with from a security perspective?
Well, and I think it's a matter of why it's a problem. Active Directory is a primary authentication source in 90+% of the organizations out there. So it's an easy target. Why is Android, so widely, compromised or focused on? Because it's got a good market share and it's a little bit easier to do it than Apple, right? So people are going to go after the low-hanging fruit, and it just so happens that Active Directory being the dominant leader for authentication, people want to focus on that first. It's kind of like, pass the hash attacks, things of that nature. It's really not even just an Active Directory problem. If I had a token and it's giving access via Kerberos to other different systems, guess what? The same type of issue could happen across multiple different systems, not just Active Directory.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that there's a skills gap? I mean, when I talk with respects to Active Directory security, when I speak with John Strand and other penetration testers, they seem to have this standard set of, like, these are the typical issues that we see in an organization. When we go back to those organizations to do another penetration test, they've made either zero progress or very little progress in securing some of these items within Active Directory. What is the cause of that? You think more of a skills gap? Is it just the complexity? Like, what leads into these problems being difficult to fix?
I think it partially is a skills gap, but then it's a matter of a governance, stance as well. Where do we get started? Where do we actually want to focus and prioritize on? There's so much stuff to go out there. What should I do, and how do I even get this thing accomplished, right? So taking away people's rights. Most organizations, their primary business is to generate revenue, provide a service. Thinking like state, local government, federal government. So the sheer thought of somebody losing productivity and not be able to do their job is kind of scary, which is why things seem to go at a really slow pace, in my perspective.
John, you there?
I am.
Hey, John.
Absolutely.
So questions for Bryan. I know yourself and your team do many penetration tests, hundreds per year, and you encounter issues in Active Directory. So do you have some questions for Bryan kind of along those lines?
Well, I know that you guys have already mentioned a couple of times the idea of PowerShell, and the big theme at our con this week, and actually I think there was a presentation at GurCon, is the days of pen testers and attackers using PowerShell are numbered. You don't ever want to say it's going to be dead, because we still find 08067 vulnerabilities on systems. We still find group policy preference passwords still to this day. So it's never going away completely. But what are you seeing insofar as like the movement of trying to lock down and restrict PowerShell in many organizations insofar as how it relates to Active Directory?
I mean, PowerShell, is definitely going to still be around for quite some time. I mean, the reason why PowerShell really exists is because Microsoft needs to be a little bit more agile. Building out a GUI, I started dealing with NT4.0 back in the day because I like having a GUI interface and I can do all this different command line type stuff. But to truly be agile, PowerShell is going to be here to stay. So with that said, I mean, kind of answer your question, PowerShell and stopping PowerShell, I mean, that's always going to be a challenge, but it's not something that really, Quest as a vendor is really going to help, mitigate. Mitigation is really going to be removing native rights. You don't have those rights to begin with.
Well, isn't a lot of the restrictions for PowerShell kind of tied to the rights as far as who can and cannot run PowerShell in an organization as well?
That's part of it. Most of what Quest is really addressing is the delegated rights across ntds.dit, who can actually make changes to an OU or reset a password, things of that nature, even a group policy, same least privileged access rights in that. But typically, you're right down to the different desktop level. Quest does have another business unit that I'm not a part of. They can actually restrict what people can do on the local operating systems to ensure you don't have to have full local administrative rights to those different boxes. Because I think most of the different attacks are happening because you compromise an account that has full rights to a box, and you're able to do the lateral traversal that way.
Cool. And then have you guys been kind of working with the MITRE attack framework, the techniques? I know that there's a lot of tools that have been released, Red Canary, and also Chris Gates and Nickerson have been working on some things as well. Insofar as mapping the type of security controls that you're actually putting in place and tying those security controls over to an actual threat matrix of techniques, not actual specific threat actors necessarily, but the techniques that attackers would use.
Most of the stuff we've been doing is really around like the NIST framework, and say the different framework power, different tools can help you identify where privileged accounts even exist across your Active Directory, and then setting up protection mechanisms based upon that type of stuff. So not so much on the MITRE kill chain, so to speak.
Okay, very cool. And then the other question I had is you mentioned that you're working with Exchange. What type of security controls and things are you guys working with? You've talked about Active Directory. What are you doing now with Exchange as well?
So the Exchange world is moving from the on-premise world out to Office 365. So traditionally, what I was going to do like governance, reporting, identify and track non-mailbox owner access, things of that nature. So now what we're really doing now that people are moving most of the Exchange infrastructure into Office 365 is giving you visibility. So here's an example. If I'm an auditor or I'm trying to figure out what's going on in my environment, I don't care where you're making these changes. Once you're in Office 365, not only do you have your on-premise Active Directory, but you have Azure Active Directory as well. I just want to know what this guy's been doing in regards to which identity on-premise or cloud's been doing it. So we're able to bring all that different information back together and give you the visibility as to what's truly going on.
And that's huge. Like a lot of times whenever we're doing assessments against organizations that are using Office 365, unfortunately, they get notifications from Microsoft or they stumble upon the actual attack sometimes 2 to 3 weeks after the attack has actually been successfully leveraged against that organization. There's very little visibility into management control and also alerting as well. So what are you guys doing to actually bring better visibility into those like Azure and Office 365?
One thing we're able to do today is even just identify who do you have and what rights do they even have. For example, group proliferations kind of happen, and it's been happening since the late 90s. People went from NT4L to Active Directory. What did? They just moved all the users and groups they had in that environment and moved it over into Active Directory. So the first thing we can do is identify who's a member of these different groups that are providing access. That's the main authorization point for most organizations. So somebody has a visibility. Does this person still need to have access or not? So that's the on-premise stuff, but we can also now go out there to your Office 365 groups and look to who's a member of it. Because in reality, there should be somebody closer to the business to validate, yeah, this guy needs access to all this different stuff, instead of some IT person that's just going to add or remove people to a group because you got a help desk ticket. So truly, to get a little bit more secure, it needs to be close to the person that can make that proper decision.
Very cool. And then the final thing is, tell us about the monkey.
Yeah.
So we have different products to fit different needs. So one is first identify, who do we have out there? These are my privileged accounts. Here's where the local administrator accounts are. Here's where I have a delegated account that has full rights to a different OU. That's part of it. But then it actually goes back out to your different data. So the data we're really addressing is really around your NTFS data in your Microsoft infrastructure. That could be on a NetApp or AMC, whatever. But I can actually say, okay, where does this group have access? So many instances, you're trying to remove the footprint, so we can actually identify where these different groups have access, and maybe we can actually go along and remove some different access based upon identifying that we no longer need it or not. The second portion, it's kind of like, in Linux, if you're root, you have all power. Well, if you're domain admin, you usually have all power. So how about we restrict that access? How about we delegate out who can do what, where in the directory, and only give people the rights to be able to do those different items? With that said, we can even add additional workflow. If I'm making a change that can affect everybody in my organization, more than likely I want to have another set of eyes to actually approve or deny that different request. So we can put different controls in place. So no, you can't just use this one account and have full control across your entire Active Directory or group policy. Maybe for this type of change, adding or removing domain admin group takes 2 or 3 approvals. Before I make a change to group policy for a default domain policy, which affects everybody, maybe 3 people have to approve that, and we can schedule off the deployment later on. So that's kind of the protection, the identification, but when we do a lot around the detection, recovery, those aspects as well.
So you actually have a monkey built into your product. Is that
what we're talking about? I was talking about the monkey on your shoulder
in your bio picture.
That was a great answer.
There you go.
Do you literally have a product called Monkey? Did we just cross the streams here?
You did not, but the monkey of what's on your back, that could have been, what do you have to offer in your bag of products?
Oh, okay. All right.
I
was talking about your profile picture. That's fine. You were going good. Paul and I just didn't want to interrupt you. We're just let him go.
Yeah.
We'll come back and ask about the monkey.
That was in Mexico earlier this year it was in the Cancun area. There's an Acumel, animal sanctuary where, they let you hold the monkeys. That one just ended up jumping out there and playing around my hair for a little bit with a little half left.
No, that's awesome.
Now, another question I wanted to ask is a lot of times we get so caught up in the companies that we're working on. Paul and I are working on starting up a new company and have been for a while, and BHIS, and you're working with Quest. What are you doing technologically outside of the company? Well, what do you do to kind of keep yourself from getting completely sucked down into the day-to-day operations of Quest software?
What I usually do is I have to listen. I do listen to the podcast here, Security Weekly, religiously, just to really understand what's going on from other people's perspectives. So even by doing that, I've changed the way I speak. I don't want to use just our, standard marketing spill. I want to align to what people are actually using. So that's why I've actually worked on aligning our different product sets into the capabilities from the NIST framework. That way it's a common language for everybody to be able to use to truly communicate a little bit better to, executives or down to the IT staff.
If there are security folks and IT folks that maybe have just been made aware that there are some security issues with Active Directory inherent in their environment, do you have a list for people? Where do you have people start with, here's some things and projects that I need to do in order to make Active Directory more secure and harder to attack?
A lot of it is really going to be based on conversations they've had with Microsoft. There's the pass the hash attack, golden ticket attack, things of that nature. Sometimes people don't realize it's a problem until after they've been compromised. So what I usually do is I have a presentation where I kind of go over identifying the issue, protect, detect, respond, recover, to really talk about that specific attack that's happening in most organizations. Many times I'm actually talking to customers about what pass the hash really is. Different people have different experience levels. So when they understand how easy it really is, they're starting to change their conversations. And it kind of changes it from being even just a sales pitch to more of an educational, lesson as well.
Yeah, I find it difficult sometimes. Even, John, I think you run into this, even if you've done a penetration test and you've pointed out that this control or this fundamental issue in Active Directory, that's a security problem. Folks don't understand the impact. Even though John may have compromised, domain admin, and that's one thing. How do you get people to understand the impact?
It's using simple language. If you speak too technically, people will always tend to want to act like they understand, but they don't really understand. They'll just shake their head yes. So it's about changing the way that you communicate in layman's terms that anybody can understand.
I agree, because a lot of these topics, of course, are very, very technical and increasing in number, certainly over time. And, we talk about pass the hash, but there's so many different flavors of the operating system, different protocol versions, and different iterations. And like your specific situation that you're in, to explain that to someone, you got to give them a lot of history. And there's a lot of technical details in there, and that's just one issue. So I agree, like putting that in some different context that's not technical certainly helps. So, Bryan, I also want to ask you about the migration to Azure and Office 365. Is Microsoft really pushing people? Is that where a lot of your work is now today? Is that when they're faced with doing some type of upgrade, they're moving into the Azure cloud, they're moving into Office 365?
That definitely is very prevalent now. Migration's a strong word. Typically, Quest has been very well known to do 80 to 80 migrations, Exchange to Exchange migrations, going off to Office 365. While we do have tools out there, if you're doing a migration to go to Azure Active Directory, Microsoft has Azure AD DirSync, which takes a copy of your on-premise directory and automatically takes a copy and puts it in Azure Active Directory. It breaks it down. So a lot of that time, even a migration is not really necessarily the right word. It's probably more of a synchronization to get that authentication not only in your on-premise, but into your cloud identity as well.
And what security benefits do you gain specifically when you have made this switch to Azure and Office 365?
Microsoft has different versions of Office 365. There's the government instances, but even the commercial instances. And it's really, they have a vetting process. Everything isn't more constrained. So Microsoft, I believe, has invested over $1 billion to, secure Office 365. So that's where tools, vendors like Quest, we have to look, okay, what can we do to complement that? So really the value add we're providing is just really insight. A lot of people, they will actually move over to Office 365 and they'll just kind of, turn on the button and move everything over as it is today. But that means all different groups that you have a membership for and on-premise, guess what? That can move over to Office 365. You may want to take this as a good opportunity to clean up some of the different type of stuff, to choose what you're going to be putting into Office 365 and Azure Active Directory.
Oh, that's great. So what kind of insights do you offer inside of Office 365 specifically? I find it interesting that it seems like Microsoft kind of left this gap, similar to, I think, Google as well, where they offer these cloud-based software as a service, and they've kind of left it to other companies to provide those insights and visibility into some of the security and controls surrounding their infrastructure. So, like, what specifically are some of those gaps?
One of the first things is really, identifying who do we have out there, so who's a member of these different groups. That really should go back to somebody on-premise. It's your data. Those groups are being stored in Azure Active Directory and Office 365 groups, providing access to different applications such as SharePoint Online, Yammer, things of that nature. But somebody on-premise typically needs to continuously validate who has access to different type of stuff. So Microsoft's done a good job of securing it, but there's gaps where you need to identify who has access on an ongoing basis. The other challenge I really see is auditability. People have on-premise Active Directory. It's not going away anytime soon, so they still need to know what happens on-premise as well as in Office 365. In many instances, you need to keep that audit trail, what's been going on, so you can kind of identify trends as they're happening. Simple questions. Who made a change to this group? Who got added into that group? Are relatively difficult to answer without different tools, such as Quest.
I gotcha. Now, do you also offer some level of spam and phishing protection as well? I know we had another solution that was presented elsewhere on our network that vendors are starting to offer that as a service?
Not within my bag of tricks, within my business unit. Our main focus is really around the Microsoft Platform Management Stack with your on-premise, Active Directory, Exchange, as well as Office 365, including Azure AD and Exchange Online.
Awesome. John, more questions for Bryan?
I'm good here.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, was there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
One of the other key aspects I'd probably talk about is recoverability. Quest now does have a SaaS platform. It's our on-demand offerings to help, lock down who can do what with Skype for Business, online, Exchange Online, as well as recovery of your Azure AD objects. The other key piece, kind of following on the NIST framework, was full disaster recovery planning of your on-premise Active Directory. That's another thing that Quest can definitely provide a lot of value with.
No, that's great. I'm somewhat familiar with that market, and that was another area where I was like, well, Microsoft doesn't provide some kind of facility for this, but they don't, and that's why, folks like Quest and others have those services available, because obviously that's a very mission-critical and business-critical asset.
Yeah, it's important to know what they do and what they don't do. So Microsoft has the recycle bin where you can restore an object, but if I just delete an attribute or group membership, I can't restore that. Well, with tools like Quest, you can. Then there's the other challenge. A lot of mission-critical applications run on Active Directory. And many times they do their business continuity planning. They'll take this mission-critical application off-site, and they take an offline copy of a DC. But what happens if your Active Directory gets corrupt? Have you thought about that? How would you restore the entire forest? Maybe you have an application binded directly to a domain controller. Have you tested out and thought about that scenario? And you only learn this stuff by testing.
Yeah. You only find out after something bad has happened. So, well, Bryan, thank you very much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, John.
With that, we are going to take a short break, come back and talk about the enterprise security news for today. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.